Rebecca mentioned the protests there in her piece. Now, it's not the first time they've faced things like this, the royal family, but it does seem the dissenters are getting a lot more airtime this time around.
Well, indeed, Jo. I mean, I think it's partly a nature of the times we live in. Social media can get these things going very quickly. But as you say, I mean, they've always faced, or not always, but I mean, I've been on tours where the Queen has had, eggs, placards, rude remarks. I mean, it sort of goes with the territory.
God, imagine egging the Queen.
Oh yeah, no, it happened. Yeah. She in 1992 in Germany, she had a couple of eggs flying at her in Canada, New Zealand. I mean, these things happen because of who she represents, and it's the same with the Cambridges. They represent the Crown. The Crown goes all the way back. If you've got any sort of historic grievance, you can usually link it back to the Crown. Here's the Crown in human form. So, but they'll ride it. I do think with this trip, I sense that, because there haven't been any royal tours for a couple of years, everyone's got a little bit out of practice, particularly on the planning front. And I think there were glitches in the planning of this. I mean, for example, when they arrived in Belize at the start of this tour, they were met with angry comments from a remote village that claimed that their visit somehow represented sort of colonialism. But also there was an upset because their helicopter was going to land on the village playing field and nobody had asked. And I think those are the sort of things that the officials, both within the palace, but also within the Governor-General's office in that country, they should have been spotting these things. So I think when they get back from this trip, a few questions will be asked. Yes,
and possibly, Charlotte, those images of the Duke and Duchess greeting people in Trenchtown through chain fence, bit unfortunate.
A bit unfortunate. Although Raheem Sterling did the same thing, but I have to say I saw them.
He's not representing Colonial Britain.
Yeah, I have to say I did see them and I thought, no, this isn't a good look. And I can imagine William will have gone bananas behind the scenes because he's got quite the temper on him. And there have been, as Robert said, there have been some real misfires here on the planning front. And it must be really frustrating for them. They're working their socks off, and then there's just clangers like that come out of nowhere.
I think there's been a bit of mixed messaging on this right the way through. I mean, from the media generally. There seems to be this confusion that somehow Jamaica is now wanting to be fully independent, and that a lot of these protests talk about, we must throw off the shackles of colonialism. And what hasn't really been expressed, and I think should be by somebody within the entourage or within the Governor-General's office, is Jamaica's been completely independent since independence in 1962. It's as independent as the UK or Canada or any other country. And so the Cambridges are being sort of set up as a sort of, whatever your complaint about Britain is. And they're not there representing Britain at all. They're representing the Queen of Jamaica. The Queen is Queen of Jamaica. They're not there in their capacity as ambassadors for Britain. They're there as ambassadors for Jamaica. And I think that point's been missed.
And yet William felt moved to confront Britain's history of slavery.
Oh yeah,
what did you make of that?
I thought that was that absolutely that had to be an absolute key part of his main speech, which it was, in the same way that Prince Charles made very similar comments when he went to Barbados for the independence ceremony of Barbados. And I go back to one of the most remarkable visits of the post-war era, the Queen's very first state visit to Ireland back in 2011, where she talked. She said the same thing about regretting things that had happened. So yeah, you've got to face up to facts. But I mean, the whole point of these visits is to sort of look forward. To sort of generate sort of optimism and bilateral bonhomie.
But can I just ask, why do they keep expressing sorrow? You said that they express sorrow and stuff. Why don't they just say sorry?
Well, there are all sorts of gradations of,
semantics.
How can you apologise for something you didn't do is a theme you often hear. I mean, they are the latter-day representatives of what happened in the past. I mean, if we go back through history...
And the latter-day beneficiaries,
Well, I mean, but of many other things besides. I mean, the fact is that they, as I say, the Crown stands for so many things. I mean, it's the ultimate symbol of authority. But what hasn't come through on this trip is why, when Jamaica and Belize, in fact, and the Bahamas, where they go next, why, when all these countries were attaining independence, they had the option to take a presidential constitution like other countries, but they chose not to. They said, no, we want the Queen. We want to retain the Queen as our head of state. And they weren't doing it for sentimental reasons or for personal reasons. I'm sure they liked her. But they were doing it because they could see that the Crown is a very effective bulwark against overmighty politicians. That's why they have this system there, because the judiciary, the armed forces, the honours system, all these things cannot be controlled by the politicians because they're in the hands of the crown. It's not so much the Queen as Mrs. Windsor. It's the Queen as the concept of the monarch of these countries. Provides the people, not foolproof, but it gives you levels of defence against the bad guys. That's why they installed these systems, not because of some sort of deference or grovelling.
It's a very good point. But how powerful do you think the next generation of monarchy will be in arguing that and maintaining that?
I think the writing's on the wall. I think what we see in Jamaica, we've seen it in Barbados. I think over time, and it makes total sense. I mean, these countries, you've got young people thinking, why have we got a head of state who lives on thousands of miles away and only comes here every now and then? It's a perfectly natural sentiment to want to change things. But what I don't think anyone's doing is making the argument for why is the crown there? Why, you see time and again, and in some of these countries there has been fairly widespread corruption. And I think there is a wariness by the politicians as well. I mean, when I was writing my book, I found that Foreign Office files going back to the 70s, they were talking then about having a referendum on the crown. And the British High Commissioner in Kingston in 1975 says, by the end of the year, I think the Queen will no longer be Queen of Jamaica.
That's fascinating.
Nearly 50 years ago, because the politicians know that actually among the public, there's not really any great, huge, widespread public appetite.
What do you think about the Cambridges? Can they save the Commonwealth, as it were?
I think they can. They obviously are not old and fuddy-duddy. They may not be cool, but they're certainly the younger phase. They're not that cool. They're not that cool. Although I have to say, Kate's really owning her sort of image and her style.
Oh, she's looking amazing.
She's looking amazing. She definitely looks more powerful and influential than she's looked in past tours. Can they save the monarchy? I do feel like they've turned up and it's almost been doomed to fail. This whole thing. It's like they've been sent forward as sort of cannon fodder or something. But can they save the monarchy? I don't know. It doesn't seem like it.
Do you think there's been any... the Queen is often praised for sort of like the coding in her wardrobe, sort of like blue on a day when she's talking about the EU or whatever it is. Have you seen any of that in this Jamaican tour?
I think she's worn yellow and she's worn green. Last night she wore green and it was quite spectacular, and she's wearing much bolder colours. So I suppose she must be doing coding. She's definitely power dressing, I'd say.
You anything to add to that, Robert?
I wouldn't dare.
Oh,
I've got a blue tie, blue suit, and a blue shirt. I do think though. I mean, I like the fact that she's wearing Jamaican colours in some of her wardrobe, but I'm not going to venture beyond that into the realms of fashion.
It's a nice, sort of quiet way to show respect, I think, and I think sometimes it gets underrated. But
she's pulling out all the stops. It's kind of a mark of respect. She's not just sort of picking the nonsense out of the back of her wardrobe.
Well, certainly when you go, wardrobes are a very useful form of diplomacy. I mean, I mentioned earlier the Queen's state visit to Ireland, but that sticks in my mind because as she arrived, I was standing with a whole load of Irish and international journalists as she arrived, and the door of the plane opened, and out she came, emerald green, and one of them said, "Oh, that's it. She can go home now. She's won." She was wearing green. But again, at the state banquet in Dublin, her dresser had sewn thousands, or certainly hundreds, of little crystal shamrocks into her dress. It was just a small touch. But it sort of resonated. There's no words spoken. It just showed I'm making an effort.
It's interesting that you raise Ireland because obviously Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall have been on tour to Ireland this week. From what was a really difficult position 25 years ago, it seems that the royal sort of trip across the Irish Sea has become something a bit more common. Yeah,
it's become a sort of a normal thing. I mean, I remember going on one of Prince Charles's early visits to. This is back in the 90s to Londonderry, and that was in Northern Ireland. That was, that got quite tense. Things had to be cancelled at the last minute because of protests. And then really he started going there. He's incredibly fond of Ireland. He could go there before the Queen, so he was going there before her state visit. Since that state visit, things have opened up a lot more. It's particularly difficult post-Brexit because you've got that whole issue to do with Northern Ireland Protocol. That's definitely made things a little trickier. And one of the things Britain can do is send royalty, because it's apolitical. So if you're trying to stress the sort of human dynamic between two countries and get away from the politics, actually a visit like this can help. But it has been completely, I'm sure you would agree, Charlotte, it's been completely obscured by the Caribbean and the Cambridges.
Yeah, but I'm sure he's giving William advice about how to handle tricky tours with sometimes hostile audiences.
But what is this about Charles considering plans to open some of his homes to Ukrainian refugees?
I know there's a lot of talk of considering plans too. Like, has he actually done it? Has he actually opened the doors to Buckingham Palace and said, we've got 400 bedrooms?
I mean, that would be extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, it would be extraordinary. I actually wouldn't put it past Charles, but it just seems to be moving quite slowly. I'm yet to see any evidence of him actually doing it.
And also the practicalities of, at some point, they would have to be asked to leave again.
Yeah, I mean, and that would be a complete PR disaster. Such a good point, Jo. And there probably would be security issues, I suppose. They would have to vet the people that come in, and would that be a good look to start vetting refugees?
But it is interesting when there are British people opening their much smaller, much more modest homes.
Yeah, well, they need to get cracking and hurry up, because I've seen no actual evidence yet of.
I'm sure they are looking at it, but they've got to be very confident of who they're letting in. I mean, there already are security issues in this. I mean, they can't be swept aside. But I wouldn't be surprised if for Dumfries House has been spoken about. That's not technically a royal residence. I mean, the Prince of Wales owns it, but that would be a good venue. I don't think any great reluctance on his part. I think just it'll be the officials wanting to check anything. As you point out, what happens if we suddenly need to move people out? And what sort of security is? I mean, if someone's making a place their home, then they've got every right to start taking snaps or go topless in the garden or whatever. Now, can they do that in what's open to the public? And also, do you want to put people in a place where you've got lots of people wandering past taking pictures? So there are issues.